There's some books laying around. Go ahead and open them up. We just finished up A Vision for You. So we are back at the beginning. We're going to start right off with the foreword to the first edition. So we do at this part of the meeting is we open up and we allow anybody who would like to read can read. We'll pass it along as we go. Sometimes I'll interrupt. It's not to be rude. It's just to interject my experience, strength, and hope. And, we don't identify at this point because we all got to tell each other who we were at the beginning. So, what we'll do is we'll go through the first edition. We'll probably jump into the second and third. I'm not too sure. We're probably mixed up. We probably have some third editions out here and some fourth. So, we'll jump around a little bit in it. And we'll probably only get through a couple of the editions tonight. And then next week we'll get into the doctor's opinion. So, forward to the first edition. Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
Forward to the second edition.
No, the first one.
Forward to the first edition.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Stephanie. I'm an avid This is the forward that appeared in the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to admit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcome. Alcoholics Anonymous.
All right, so what's important in there? Well, we find out in the very first paragraph that the reason why they even wrote this book was to show alcoholics precisely how the first 100 men and women had recovered. That's what they say is the main purpose of the book. You can also kind of tell a little bit how egotistical we are. You can, if you kind of read in here that at the beginning they were very, how would you say it? They were pretty sure that there was going to be a lot of appeals met, so they was worrying about losing their businesses or professional folks, and they kind of still didn't want, the stigma at that time was compared to being alcoholics, they were afraid would ruin a lot of their stuff. So that's how Alcoholics Anonymous came around. They didn't want to, later on we'll find out, Dr. Bob actually, he could not stay sober and get sober until he did his amends. But what held him back from doing his amends was he was a doctor and he didn't want to tell the town that he was drinking all the time. Yet the whole town already knew that he was drinking all the time. So that's kind of our state of delusion that we get into. Nobody else knows what's going on. Only I know. The truth of the matter is it's pretty obvious because we're usually pretty sloppy. So, but this is a fact that 100 men and women recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Some people ask me, why do I refer to myself as a recovered alcoholic? I am not a cured alcoholic. I put one drink in me, I get drunk. And I crave another one. And I go on a run and a tear just like anybody else. The reason why that I say I'm recovered is because I don't suffer from that obsession of the mind anymore. I don't suffer from that hopeless state of mind and body where I don't think I can live life without alcohol. I know that I can live a successful, happy life without alcohol today. The reason why I've been relieved of the obsession of the mind is no will of my own. I didn't do that. I tried to do it on my own and could not do it. It was through the step work and the directions outlined in this book that I followed that removed the obsession of the mind for me. So I became recovered by doing the steps and staying in the steps. Okay? Forward to the second edition. Who would like to start reading? Come on. Okay.
Forward to the second edition. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition.
All right, let me pause right there. So they were sober 3 years when they wrote the first edition. Now the second edition is 16 years after that. Go ahead.
In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics.
All right, so before they ever wrote this book, there were no recovered alcoholics. And in less than 20 years, from the time this thing started, 3 years later they wrote the book, 16 years later, they have the second edition out. So that's 19 years. 3 and 16 is 19. It goes from zero, or from two major groups, it was none, two major groups, went to 6,000 groups and 150,000 recovered alcoholics. When before, there was never anything. Go ahead.
Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier...
That's Bill and Dr. Bob. Bill was the New York stockbroker. Dr. Bob was the Akron physician. Go ahead.
6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience, following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God.
And that's what our steps look like in the beginning. You can keep going.
Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one of the alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery.
Okay, so Bill was a guy, he couldn't stay sober for any amount of time, and he tried numerous times, as we'll find out in his story. And he kept trying to get sober, landed in what now would be detoxes and treatment centers. They didn't have him back there, but that would be equivalent to hospitals he landed up in. And he couldn't stay sober. And Ebby came to him with what were called the tenets of the Oxford group. Absolute hope, absolute love, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and I forget what the other absolute is. But he found that he couldn't live by those. But what he did come up with was the need for moral inventory, confession of our defects, restitution for those harmed, being helpful to others, and a belief in dependence upon a God. So, he sobered up through that, and he was out trying to help other people sober up. Now, this is a guy who could never stay sober. What he did realize was that he couldn't get anybody else sober, but he stayed sober himself. And that's what kind of hit him and realized of how much importance it is. As we go through our literature, that once we go through the steps, we're going to find out that practical experience shows us that nothing ensures immunity from alcohol like intensive work with other alcoholics. That's what saves the day. You guys ensure my sobriety. That's why I'm here. I'm here because without you guys, I don't stay sober. I can't do it on my own. If I'm not giving away what I have, I don't get anything. Whatever I was given yesterday is gone. I need to do work today to make sure that I continue to carry the message so that I may stay sober. Now, a lot of people ask, why is that? I don't know why that is. The only thing that I can come up with is that when I'm given to somebody else, it keeps me open enough to receive the gift of sobriety that I'm given today. Me, on my own free will, I don't like to help anybody. I'm a natural taker. I want everybody to give me everything. I want everybody to listen to what I have to say. And I want you guys to live your lives around my life. I don't know if that sounds familiar or not, but if all you guys would just do what I told you to do, my life would be pretty dang good. The only thing is you guys think the same way. You want me to do what you want to do. I want you to do what you see how it goes. So I'm always at war. But I find that when I'm in this process, that when I practice these steps, when I carry the message, when I pass on hope to somebody else, it knocks enough of the ego out of me that it puts me in a place that I can accept the gift of sobriety. The gift has always been there. I'm just too egotistical to take it. I know too much. I figured it out. I'm okay without any help. That's what my mind wants to tell me. The truth of the matter is, and it's evidenced by 20 years of my own experience, is that I cannot stay sober on my own. I can't. I tried it numerous times. I tried it every possible way I can think of. Of my own free will, I don't stay sober. So I need this gift. The problem is my ego gets in the way of receiving the gift. So my ego needs to be knocked out of the way That's what the 12 steps does for me. It opens me up to receive the gift. Kind of make sense? All right, who would like to continue reading?
Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them were sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous, from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post, and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money?
And there were.
Would there be striving for power and prestige?
There were.
Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies.
So all of us come in here and struggle with sobriety and learning how to incorporate and practice these steps in our lives. We also did that as a fellowship. You know, we come into it many years after it started. But they had all these same troubles, you know, troubles about money, about power, prestige, who was going to run it, how was it going to be done. And out of that, just like our struggles created the 12 steps, the struggles that the group had came up with the 12 traditions. So all this stuff wasn't like given and they knew about it from the get-go. We had to struggle through all this stuff just like we struggle with sobriety and, you know, learning in early sobriety. So don't be too hard on yourself when you're having difficulty. We have all gone through it. We all continue to go through it. We went through it as a group and an organization, and our co-founders even went through it. Okay? Who else would like to continue to read now?
This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated all on page 564 of this book. Though none of these principles had force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large numbers of recoveries and the reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. 50% got sober and at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book.
So we had a lot of help getting off the ground from Earth People. A lot of doctors, a lot of the press, a lot of people saw the impact that the 12 steps and the recovery was making in people's lives. And they saw families be put back together. And they saw men and women who were once something that destroyed themselves with alcohol and drugs rise up again out of the ashes. And they were really taken back by it. And they liked what they seen. And they went ahead and they helped spread AA also. So it wasn't just alcoholics who spread, this message. Non-alcoholics also did too. And they also found out that the spiritual way of life, as we'll find out later in our reading, really helped the families also. So the families started to practice this way of life too, and they really blossomed into new types and new points in their life. So it wasn't only for us. You want to keep going?
Sure. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America, and in distant lands, the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% per year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we should never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book, and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom.
And that's really important, because you can tell by the time they got to the second edition that they knew that they had something, and they had, because of the growth in it. Why is all this important? Does anybody really know? Why is it so important that we know all these different little facts? Huh?
Gives us hope that it works.
Yeah. It's a way to... When this book first came out, you got to remember there weren't meetings all over the place. So if you were a drunk that wanted to get sober and you heard about Alcoholics Anonymous, they sent you a book. That's why this is directions. They sent you this book. There were no sponsors. There wasn't Bottom Line down the street. There was only 2 meetings in the whole United States. One was in Ohio and the other in New York. If you were in Florida, what, are you screwed? No. They sent you the book, you followed the directions, and you started a group in your area. So, and that happened. And that's what they want to let you guys know, is that this thing really does work to bring hope, just like she said. That even though there weren't meetings on every street corner, sending out this book made an impact on so many lives that in a very short time, this thing went from just in America, in 2 cities, way up in the northern America, to starting to spread over 50 countries. That's amazing. If you could do that with a product, think about it. If you could come up with an invention that in 16 or 19 years from now would be in 50 countries, that would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? Pretty rich too, wouldn't you be? That's what I would be. So they want to show you the impact that it actually made and why it's important. In the foreword to the 3rd edition, it's going to talk a little bit more about the numbers again. We're going to skip right by it. It's just going to talk about the increase. And the foreword in the 4th tradition also, it talks about the increase. But it's something that's really important that I want you guys to hear. Is in the preface, and this is only in the 4th edition of in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'm not too sure. But I'm going to read the preface to you of the 4th edition. And it says, the 1st edition appeared in April of 1939. In the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. It reached, and by 1955, reached over 1 million copies. By 1976, 19 million in all formats. But it says, because this book has become the basic text for our society, you know what a textbook is, right? Whenever we go learn math or we go to learn science, they give us a textbook. And the textbook is a book of facts that we follow. And if we do the directions that are in that textbook, we get the result that they show us to be in that textbook. So, if we follow directions in this textbook, we get the result promised in this book. After each step, there's a promise of what will happen. And as we go through this book, I'll show you those promises. But there will be a way that you feel, and there's a result that you get. It says, because the basic test for our society has helped such a large number of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program, which is the first 164 pages, has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th edition. So the first 164 pages of this book is the exact same in the first one that they ever put out to today's. They don't change that. That's the basic text. That's the meat of the program. That's the answer. They do not change that. The only thing that they do are the stories in the back. That's the only changes they make to a book. That they add stories in to go along with the difference in the time, how we have changed in a society, and to help relate as we change, as our own fellowship changes also. So the second section, called The Doctor's Opinion, has kept intact, as it was originally written in 1939 by William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. So, what they did add in the second edition was the 12 traditions, because in the first edition, when they first started it, they didn't have the 12 traditions yet. They learned that out of failure and difficulties. So by the second time, almost 16 or 19 years later, they finally had the 12 traditions. So I just wanted to let you guys know that this book, from day one it was written till now, the first 164 pages is the same and will remain the same, because that is the actual program. Okay? All right. Okay, so next week we'll start in the doctor's opinion. This time I'm going to let you guys open up the meeting and